Alright, so here's going to be the help video for the word problems, section 4.8. Again, if you still have questions after looking at these problems, feel free to bring it up in class. Alright, so the first one is talking about a number, and that number is 56 less than its square. So I've defined my variable as n, and it says that the number is 56 less than the number squared. So I've got my equation, n equals n squared minus 56. So from here, I just begin solving like normal. I can't factor until everything's set equal to 0, so I'll subtract n. I've got n squared minus n minus 56, so I'm looking for factors of 56 that multiply to be negative 56 but add back together to be negative 1, and that would be negative 8 times 7 and negative 8 plus 7. So I'm able to factor. I set each piece equal to 0 and solve. So my two options are 8 or negative 7. Number 4 talks about two odd integers where the sum of their squares equals 130. Now don't forget, we'll define our variable n as our first odd integer, and don't forget, even though it does say that they're odd, whether it's odd or even, odd integers are always 2 units apart, even integers are always 2 units apart. So I've got n and n plus 2. I set up my squares, n squared plus n plus 2 squared equals 130. But don't forget, n plus 2 squared is going to require a little bit more work from us. We have to remember to write it as n plus 2 times n plus 2. By the time I multiply that out, I've got n squared plus 2n plus 4. I can start combining like terms. 2n plus 2n gets me 4n. I bring my n squared from my original equation down, combine two more like terms, and I'm ready to start isolating and having my equation equal to 0. In order to do that, I'll subtract 130. Now, like I've talked about, if it feels like a value seems really large and we're trying to factor it, there's a good chance that we could factor something out to begin with. In this case, I'm able to factor out a 2. That makes the factoring a little bit more straightforward since I simply have 1n squared. What are the factors of negative 63 that add up to positive 2? 9 and negative 7. I finish my factoring. I know that I don't need to set 2 equal to 0 because it does not have a variable. I set my set of parentheses equal to 0 and solve. So, in one case, I could have negative 9 or negative 7. In the other case, I could have positive 7 and positive 9. All right, number 6. So in number 6, it tells us that we're building a fence, and we've got 66 feet of fence, and we want to enclose an area of 216. So I know that I've got a perimeter, 2w plus 2l equals 66. I want to isolate, basically I've got a system of equations of sorts. I want to isolate either w or l, doesn't matter which one you isolate. I isolated l, so that I can substitute it in to my area formula. Length times width. It's just now that length is represented as negative w plus 33. I've got to do some distribution. I know that I can't solve until my equation's equal to 0, and since I prefer to have a positive w squared, I'm going to add w squared and subtract 33w to the other side. Now, the value 216 is a little large, a little cumbersome. I've started writing down all of my factors, 1 and 216, 2 and 108, 3 and 72, etc., until I got to 9 and 24, which if I use negative 9, negative 24, they will add back together to be negative 33. I finish my factoring, set each piece equal to 0, and so I know that I've got basically two options where the dimensions either way are 9 by 24 feet. Whether I call the width 9 and the length 24, or the width 24 and the length 9, doesn't really matter. Now, in 24, I set 24 up in a unique way to make my life a little bit easier, basically so I don't have to work with fractions or decimals. I defined L as my length, and I'm thinking of the problem like this, where I've got two lengths and a shorter width. That way, when I isolate W so that I can set up my equation, I don't have to deal with fractions. Dealing with fractions and factoring can be very challenging. I substitute into my area formula. I know that area equals length times width. I distribute my L. And again, I prefer to have a positive lead term, so I'm going to add 2L to both sides and subtract 21L from both sides. Now that my equation is equal to 0, I can start factoring. Can't factor anything out, so I've got to take the long approach. 2L squared times 55 is 110L squared. So I start looking for the factors that are going to add back together and get me negative 21, and those happen to be 10 and 11. From there, I split my middle term. I made my groups. For my first group, I could take out 2L. For my second group, I could take out negative 11. I finish my factoring, set each piece equal to 0, and solve. So I could have a length of 5, I believe it was feet, and a width of 11 feet, or I can have a length of 5 feet and a width of 10. Pardon me, it was in meters. So I can either use the dimensions 5 meters by 11 meters or 5.5 meters by 10 meters. All right, hopefully this helps. If it doesn't, please feel free to ask in class, and I will see you soon.